Hello everyone and welcome to another News Coolum video. I'm about to try to answer something that I consider a bit of a hit piece from the New York Times, and I'm going to be driving my Bolt EV to Las Vegas and back. In the New York Times article, they claimed that it took them 5 hours of charging. Now, I've done this trip numerous times, and where I'm coming from is Thousand Oaks, so this is going to be about 300 miles each way, which is farther than what the New York Times writer drove. I was also really excited to find out that Alex Venz, who also has a YouTube channel and drives a Tesla Model 3, said, "Hey, are you planning to do a road trip?" So I'm here with Alex Venz, who has his own video channel, and we're going to do a trip to Las Vegas and back in our respective cars. My Tesla Model 3 and his Bolt EV. In Vegas, they do have charging overnight at hotels,
but we won't be doing that.
We will not. We're not going to take the time because the New York Times reporter didn't take the time to do that.
Why am I doing this trip? Well, because, I watched your video, we've done some videos together before, and I figured, hey, let's turn this into a road trip. If you're going to talk about the Bolt and how the Bolt was mischaracterized, and a lot of people were also frustrated that Tesla was only mentioned in passing in the New York Times article, let's just show both.
And so this will create a very good spectrum.
Right, it'll show people kind of the full range. And you're starting at...
I'm just below 100% charge, somewhere between 95 and 97%.
Okay, my car is currently at 90.
And so what I know of the predictions for the weather is it's about a 10-mile-an-hour wind, which will actually mostly be a tailwind on the way out. The prediction is that will turn into about a 15-mile-an-hour headwind on the return.
Oh boy.
But it's going to be relatively mild. The high for Baker today is only about 103 or 104 degrees. So yeah, we'll be nice and cool.
As far as rules, what rules are we setting for the trip?
I personally don't like to go more than 5 miles an hour over the posted speed limit.
Plus 5 is fine.
All right, so let's hit the road. I'm so excited that we're going to be joined here today by our fellow member of the press, Mr. Penn. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Penn. I must say you're looking very fine today. I hope to demonstrate to Mr. Penn here and show him the best practices for traveling with an electric vehicle and make it an educational opportunity, not just a way to focus on the misconceptions and the misgivings that a lot of people already have that I personally think are born primarily out of ignorance. No, we can't take the HOV lane. Don't you have any journalistic integrity? What's the matter, Mr. Penn? Been pushing too many pencils? Hey, Mr. Penn, is your tip felt? Would you like it to be? Sure, we're up at about 3,000, 3,500 feet now, but man, Mr. Penn, you are getting swole. You're just happy to see me? All right, so I did decide to stop here in Victorville. It's 100 miles to get to Baker. I had to use the bathroom anyway. So we've only been here, sitting here charging for like 10 minutes, just to run in and use the bathroom. I wanted to show what it would be like for a person who was maybe suffering from range anxiety or whatever. Just say something went wrong and you needed a little bit of extra time charging. I wanted to demonstrate what that would look like. And because this is a DC fast charger, even not the fastest DC fast charger, you only need to be here for about 10 to 15 minutes in order to do this trip successfully. And so we're just going to go ahead and turn on the AC and then get ready to head out. Can I plug in here? All right, well, that was a pretty good lunch, a pretty hefty lunch too, actually, a lot of food. Unfortunately, Mr. Penn here didn't want to join me because he doesn't believe in doing two things at the same time. So he didn't want to leave the car while it was charging. But, you know, that's his loss. You know, it's like he's got a hollow leg anyway. And it looks like the charge session actually stopped now. We're at 58%, but I'll probably just end up charging up to 65% battery. We ended up charging a little longer than we needed to, maybe a lot longer than we needed to actually. Yeah, we're gonna just head out to Vegas now. It's actually only 85 miles to the Electrify America chargers. Let's head out. Right, we're reporting live from Las Vegas.
Right. I did a reasonable job of staying with you, but lost you in LA traffic. Caught up with you later. I think shortly after I caught up with you later, you peeled off. That was
I bolted off the freeway.
Yes, yeah, you did. Yeah. I made 2 stops.
Right.
First stop was at Baker, as planned, even though I said Guillermo or Baker.
Yeah.
I just went
interchangeable, really.
Yeah, went with Baker. It's the larger of the two, and it worked out fine. There was no waiting at all. I charged there for about 15 minutes. I know the goal here is to do the trip in, you know, sort of a short amount of time, but at the same time, I know we're having to juggle.
Right.
You know, do we want to make this almost a race to do it as quickly as possible, or do we want it to be something more representative of how someone might travel? And so that does complicate this whole thing a fair bit. But and then I stopped at Prim I charged for 10 minutes there.
Okay.
So total charging time was 25 minutes, and that was really more charging than I actually needed, because right now the car is at like a 52% state of charge, which is way higher than it needs to be. But I figured maybe it's not so bad. I mean, if someone wanted to come to Vegas, they wanted to do a little extra driving around town and still not have to charge while they're here, that's fine. Yeah,
my trip actually went pretty much as I expected it would. Just after Cajon passes the Victorville charger, and I charged up for about 12 minutes, and that got me to about 60% battery. And I set off from there. But when I arrived in Baker, I had, according to the Baker charger, 16%.
I think that is a state of charge that a fair percentage of drivers would be very comfortable.
And that's part of why I did the trip the way I did. Is I've often been criticized for going too deep into the Bolt EV's battery state of charge, and people will say, well...
You do run that thing scary low sometimes.
And my only counterpoint to that is I've never run out.
Yet?
Yeah, but anyway. So that was sort of a theme of this trip, and I kind of decided at that point, stopping in Victorville, that, you know, to your point, are we trying to make this a race? Are we trying to prove how fast we can do it? And I realized at that point, no, I just want to give a realistic vision of what a trip like this would look like in a Bolt EV. So avoiding that sort of anxiety that would come with dipping too far down into the battery. I arrived at Baker with 16% charge. I charged for about 30 minutes, but I had 3 different chargers that were down. The first charger was non-responsive. It was DOA. So I moved to the second charger, and that actually charged long enough for me to have a nice lunch. 30 minutes, but it did cut off at about 50% or 58% battery. So I, again, wanted to replicate a comfortable trip, and I wouldn't drive from Baker to Vegas on only 58%. So I actually did charge up to 65%. That took another 8 minutes of charging. In Vegas here, there's an Electrify America station. You were there waiting for me. Well, I spent another 30 minutes charging while you were checking out the site, and we were sort of gabbing. So that brings my total charging time up to an hour and 20 minutes.
But that charge is part of what's going to get you to your first stop tomorrow.
Right. That should be more than enough charge for me to leave here and drive all the way back to Baker again.
We left at 11:10. I got here at 4:41.
Right. And yeah, so I think you're about a half an hour ahead of me. Coming from Ventura County, 4.5 hours to get to Vegas is typically the pure driving time. If you made it in a little more than 5 hours, that would make sense given we were delayed by traffic, and then you had 24 minutes of charging and 12 minutes of stop time.
There are a lot of level 2 destination chargers here in Las Vegas. Yeah, there's level 2 charging all over the place, but there's gatekeeping going on. Those are all hotel property chargers, and they're putting those chargers behind valet. What? I don't know. What's a valet bribe? $10, $20?
I don't use valet. I mean, I drive a Bolt EV. We are valets.
And you know that's the other thing is the on-strip hotels that have the charging, they're
pricey.
Inexpensive. Are you going to choose a hotel room that costs a bunch more just because they have destination charging?
Right, because you're looking at easily $100, $150, $200 difference between rooms that come with EV charging and rooms that don't. And then the other thing is too, and this is something that I've noted on other trips, I've actually run into a number of cases where the destination chargers were full.
Yeah. I know when we were talking about planning this, I spent time researching hotels, figuring out what's going on with destination charging, and that I wanted to do a whole thing showing off all the destination charging here in Vegas and talking about how they've expanded it, which they have, which is wonderful to see. I had to step back for a moment and think, okay, well, how is this going to look from like an optics standpoint, where you have a Tesla owner and look at all of this great infrastructure that's available if you want to pay the low price of $300 plus a night.
It's nice to have destination chargers at rooms that are $150, $200. But I mean, if you're even just being pragmatic, as you say, why are you going to spend $100 or $150 more for a room than you would normally spend just because it has a charger?
Right.
And that, I think a lot of people who are price sensitive aren't going to be doing that. I guess my final thought about that, though, is you were researching rooms with destination chargers, and that was your knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah, that was my
why wouldn't you just charge on site? Should we talk about the conspiracy?
Conspiracy?
EVgo conspiracy.
Oh. I relate to a comment that my wife had made after reading that New York Times article.
Right.
Which is, why did they skip a DC fast charger to then charge at level 2? Was it just not an EVgo station and they didn't want to be there?
And here's the thing, is it wasn't an EVgo level 2 charger that they were using. So if you read that New York Times article, there was something weird that the writer said where they tried to activate a charger in Vegas and the EVgo representative couldn't get it working. And they plugged into a ChargePoint level 2 charger. I've actually used this charger when I've stayed overnight at Whiskey Pete's. Why would you skip a charger, like you said, like your wife said, a DC fast charger in Vegas? Our concern is that was EVgo intentionally avoiding the Electrify America charging site that I used, that Alex was able to see here in Vegas? I mean, it's a very impressive site. With a journalist, Mr. Penn, would you take him to a competitor's site that maybe perhaps exceeds the capabilities of your own sites?
That should have been a really clear-cut thing. It's like, okay, well, yeah, there's a DC fast charger here. It's not ours. But, this is the type of thing that we're working toward.
Right. It could be simple ignorance, right? Maybe that EVgo representative didn't realize that the Electrify America site in Vegas was up.
Maybe not, yeah.
But then there is a possibility that he intentionally avoided it. And so I really do hope that that's not what EVgo did, because outside of the Electrify America chargers in Vegas, all of the EVgo chargers here are only 100 amp. So even if you were to use
fairly
them,
old units, then.
Fairly old units. It doesn't surprise me that they had problems with them. But just those units alone, The Bolt EV would see a 30% slower charging rate. Like you said, if I were in their shoes, I would definitely show them the Electrify America charger, because I feel like these networks need to be working in conjunction, and they are to a certain extent. You have to actually embrace your competitors, at least in the charging infrastructure world, because Baker right now, EVgo Baker, is on an island. And they're going to need the Electrify America chargers that are being built on either side. And people who want to travel on either network are probably going to use both networks. So I think it's an important thing to do.
The take a weekend trip to Vegas from LA is a thing that a lot of people do. It's not some, isolated trip that almost no one ever takes.
I was telling, Alex, as we were messaging back and forth about the logistics of this trip, 3 of my coworkers chimed in and said, yeah, we're going to Vegas this weekend.
No, it's...
And not together, in different cars.
Yeah, it is something that people do, and it's going to be a problem for us on the way back because everyone goes home on Sunday.
Right, exactly.
And on that note...
On that disappointing note...
we shall conclude for the evening.
Good morning. We're here in Prim Valley at Whiskey Pete's. So this is the location where the New York Times reporter ended up trying to charge up, and I think just enough to maybe comfortably get back to the EVgo DC fast charger in Baker. Depending on Alex's schedule, I think he's going to want to leave in about an hour to an hour and a half. We're heading out now. I came over here to the Buffalo Bills side to grab some breakfast, but we're gonna head back out. Alex is supposed to be leaving right around now. Again, this isn't really a race of any sort. It's just trying to showcase our cars and how we would drive these cars given the possibility that destination charging wasn't available, right? All right, well, we're up to just over 60% battery, and I'm taking advantage of the excess power to run the climate control, let the battery cool off. It's 100 miles to Victorville, but it's 100 miles uphill with a headwind, uphill both ways through the snow. So it's a really inefficient route, and of course it's 75 mile an hour freeway the entire time. So we're going to charge up to 65%, which is probably going to be pretty close to a 40-minute session here, which will bring our total charging time up to about 2 hours at this point. All right, well, we're taking off. We hit the 68% cutoff. That's the point where it drops below 105 amps charging. Ran into a nice couple with their Hyundai Kona Electric. Yeah, I let them know that, it's the other chargers were actually faster because they were using the 50 kilowatt chargers. I was telling them that for them, 15 to 20 minutes faster for them to use the faster chargers. Luckily, we have these faster chargers coming online, and it's saving time. All right, so I probably didn't need another lunch, but the timing worked out. I think we're just gonna let this charge session go to 45 minutes. That should be more than enough to basically get us back. Though we are gonna have to audible routes because the freeway that we took out here is gonna take about an hour and 40 minutes longer than if we take the back road. We're about to leave. We're almost at 45 minutes, and that's gonna put the total charging time for this entire trip to 2 hours and 45 minutes.
We're both back at Thousand Oaks. We arrived almost at the same time, so we did manage to coordinate our departure times really, really well for the second leg of the trip. You were, what, like 10 minutes behind me, maybe?
Yeah, and that makes sense given there was a little bit of a disparity.
Let's look at total trip time. So
Right.
what was your total driving time?
My total driving time was 10 hours and 10 minutes.
Okay, that's pretty much the same as mine. Mine was 10 hours, 4 minutes, so that's all in the noise there. And my total trip charging time was 59 minutes.
And my total trip charging time was 2 hours and 45 minutes.
Okay.
So,
both of these are still sounding a lot better than that New York Times article, and you have to keep in mind that we took a longer trip than they did.
right. By at least it appears about 20 miles farther each direction. So I had to drive a little bit farther than Alex on the return trip because the charger in Victorville is actually past the turnoff. It's not much, but I think your total mileage was 607 miles.
Yeah, 607.4.
And mine was 614.2. So only about 7 miles difference, but both significantly longer than the trip taken by the New York Times reporter. But that would give us
Theirs was 560?
about 560, I believe. It was from downtown or from LA proper, which we drove through on our way to Vegas. Our average driving speeds were about 60 miles an hour, but truthfully, that's what you're going to expect in this type of traffic most of the time.
I think we both did a pretty good job of, when possible, holding to the +5, but I mean, when you encounter traffic, and it is what it is. As far as efficiency goes, just as a point of reference for everyone watching, for the whole trip in my performance dual motor long range Model 3 with the 18-inch Aero wheels, I averaged 241 watt hours per mile. And what was your efficiency?
Right, and so in my 2017 Bolt EV LT with Cruise Eco rims, I just want to throw that in there. It was 3.7 miles per kilowatt hour,
That's like
which is
270
almost
watt hours
exactly 270 watt hours per mile.
That's pretty good for the Bolt.
And honestly, it's about normal. Like, that's kind of what stood out to me about this trip, is that nothing really stood out to me about this trip. This is just a typical trip to Vegas. So, and I think this is something that we mentioned early on at the very beginning of this video, is I feel these two cars provide a very good sort of bookend for what's available in EVs today.
Oh yeah, we had a total difference in charging time of, let's say, I was 59 minutes and you were
2 hours 45.
2:45. Okay, so round mine up to an hour.
Right.
You got about an hour and 45 minutes additional charging in the Bolt versus the Model 3. And so I suppose you can ask yourself, how much more do you want to pay for an hour and 45 minutes, say?
Right, and pretty much every other car is going to fall somewhere into that spectrum.
Yeah.
So some closer to the Bolt EV, some closer to the Model 3. But yeah, I think that gives you a good idea. And mind you, that is 10 hours of driving.
Yeah.
So that's a very
without using any level 2 overnight charging at all. So this is just like the straight DC fast charge time to drive for that long. Right. So now, in my case, an hour DC fast charging for 10 hours of driving. That is
right. And I've sort of made this argument before. I do think that sort of 3-to-1, 4-to-1 driving time to charging time ratio that you can get in basically the Bolt EV or better in terms of electric vehicles, I really do feel that that's the point of entry for most Americans, because that's about how long you're going to drive before you want to stop for a half hour.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think overall, I think it was, and this sort of proved the point that, you can sit behind a desk 1,000 miles away and calculate on a sheet of paper estimated efficiencies and charging times and factor the wind, but ultimately, like, real world.
Speaking of weather, I actually got rain coming out of Vegas.
Yeah.
So, that is also something which EV owners know does impact your efficiency. So, we had wind that was shifting directions because driving in the desert, and rain coming out of Vegas.
Yeah, I mean, you're driving, 300 miles each way. Also, just for those of you who want to know, one of the chargers that I had to rely on is still the older 125 amp charger. It isn't a huge difference, but even for the Bolt EV, that's going to be at least 5 to 10 to maybe 15 minutes of total charging time difference between if 150 amp or faster chargers were available.
You just need more of those Electrify America chargers.
And they're coming. They're coming. So yeah, that is also a consideration. Is even using older chargers, it's still less than 3 hours of total charging time for the Bolt EV, which is an hour and a half less than what CleanTechnica predicted using a better route planner for a shorter route, and almost 2 hours and 15 minutes less than what the New York Times reporter reported for a shorter route. So
yeah, that sounds right. I don't remember their numbers exactly, but that sounds about right.
5 hours.
Okay.
So, but yeah, that's sort of what we wanted to do here, is just demonstrate what's available for EVs, what the trips look like, and be sure to check out Alex's video if you're watching this conclusion on my video, because he's going through some of the details about what it's like to travel with the Model 3, and likewise I go into the details and the nuances of what I was doing. And I have to tell Alex that those carne asada fries with the sour cream and pico de gallo, that was to die for. I'm not rubbing it in or anything, it's just saying it was very good.
Hey, I had time to buy a bottle of water this time.
That's true. I mean, you have to use your time wisely.
Anyway, regardless of whose channel you're watching right now, if you have any questions about the trip or about either of our cars or the approach that we took to this, go ahead and post those in the comments below on either of our channels. And we'll both be answering questions probably on each other's channels and stuff. So,
yeah. Well, I'll sneak over and moderate your channel. Lay the hammer down. But thank you for watching. It was I hope it was helpful. I hope it was informative.
I hope so too.
Yeah. All right. Great job, Alex.